don't hit that skip button because I have huge news for you. The Rewind of the Living Dead t shirt lives. It is here. It is available to purchase. Oh, yes, I'm not kidding. We finally got our Rewind of the Living Dead t shirt out, and it's amazing. It is printed by the same company that prints for Cavity Colors and Fright Rags, which, if you're a hardcore horror fan who buys a lot of horror t shirts, I know I do, you know that's the very best and highest quality because we couldn't do anything less for our fans. It's an amazing full color design designed by Jason Ragosta. It's very cool. It features a zombified myself, a zombified Damon, and it looks just like an awesome horror shirt because that's what we want, because we're horror fans too. So we wanted to make a t-shirt that you could really sink your teeth into. Go to rewindofthelivingdead.bigcartel.com. Again, that's rewindofthelivingdead.bigcartel.com to get your t-shirt today. Rewind of the Living Dead is a review show, so spoilers are ahead.
Adaptations of Bram Stoker's Dracula started almost as quickly as the book was released in 1897, with stage plays and eventually the first film based upon the novel coming in 1921. For well over 100 years, Dracula has served as the inspiration for dozens of films and TV shows, but it was 2003 when a production company bought the rights to a story that focused on only one chapter from the legendary book called The Captain's Log, that detailed the journey of the doomed crew of a ship called the Demeter and how they fell victim to a bloodthirsty predator while carrying crates from Romania to London.
Evil is on board this ship.
This beast, it needs blood.
Sits everywhere.
I want to kill the cursed thing. Kill it. We can't even find it. Where the bloody hell is it? There is no escape.
We call him Dracula.
Rated R. Only in theaters August 11th.
In the latest episode of Rewind of the Living Dead, we get our sea legs ready and arm up with wooden stakes as we review the 2023 film The Last Voyage of the Demeter. Welcome back to Rewind of the Living Dead. I'm Damon Martin.
And I am the Dragon of Blood, the relentless Prince of Pain. Patrick Guerra, how are you?
That was a lot. I was like, where are we going with this?
Well, listen, we're talking The Last Voyage of the Demeter tonight. We're talking about really Dracula lore, Damon. And you're much more well-read than me. So I'm going to let you do the bulk of like the kind of history of all of this. But when I saw this trailer, I was actually genuinely excited because I think that the idea of like exploring a very classic form of Dracula is always exciting. And I saw that it was Andre Ovredal. I don't know if I'm butchering his name or not, but I know that he's a very solid director. So I got really excited. Damon, what about you seeing that imagery in that trailer and realizing like, oh, we're going to tell a really classic Dracula story here?
I was intrigued. I was really intrigued because I'm not like, I don't read a ton. Like, I read so much classic literature in college because I was an English literature major. So I read so many of these like older books when I was coming in college. So I don't really spend a lot of my free time reading them now. But I was very familiar with the Dracula story. So when I heard that they were going to focus on this one chapter, which is, I'm not going to say it's a throwaway chapter. It's not, but it's not, it really isn't like that much. Like the Captain's Log chapter is just a little side chapter in the book of Dracula. You know what I mean? I'm not saying it doesn't matter, but I'm saying it's not really a major part of the story. It's just,
Right.
you know, basically the journey of getting him from Romania to London and the ship that shows up in London basically abandoned. And in the book, the captain is the last man standing, and he's basically tied to the masthead to basically, you know, steer the ship, and then he burns up, and that's basically how, you know, we find him, and that's the last survivor of the Demeter. It's not, it is told through the captain's log, like through his, you know, through his writing in the log, but I was fascinated that they took that little bit of a chapter that is, again, kind of almost like a side note to the Dracula novel and turned it into a movie because it is fascinating. I mean, it is kind of fascinating when you think about a voyage, a month-long voyage across, Europe, through the ocean of Europe, and then landing in London and Dracula being on board and him basically decimating this crew. That's interesting to me. And so when I saw the trailer and I knew the concept, I was kind of like, okay, you got me. Like this looks pretty interesting.
Yeah, it invoked a lot of classic cinema that I've thought of over the years with regards to Dracula. Nosferatu being like right at the top of that list because you even see a little bit in the trailer that you're going to see a bit more of a like an animalistic version of Dracula, the Dracula that's buried in dirt, covered in worms and rats, and has sort of a more of a monstrous look, before he transforms into his very debonair, more Monster Squad self, if you will. So yeah, I was really kind of looking forward to it, not really knowing what I was going to get into because it's not like I delve deep into the book side of things, and like you're saying, is more of a throwaway chapter than anything. But I really wanted to see what a director could do with it because I think those classic Dracula movies, they're burned into every director's dream book. I don't care. I mean, Francis Ford Coppola made Bram Stoker's Dracula because it's just great literature, and it's literature that I think artists want to interpret as best they can. I believe Robert Eggers, if I'm not mistaken, is trying to get a Nosferatu movie made.
He is doing a Nosferatu movie. Yeah, he's actually,
Yeah,
they were in production, I believe, when the strike happened. So, uh,
right. So, it's just one of those things where it's like directors want to get their hands on this material, and it's Andre Overdahl who has done Troll Hunter, which I actually really liked, and what scary stories to tell in the dark,
yes. And
that
the
which I think we
autopsy,
reviewed.
we did review that
Yeah.
when it came out a couple years ago. And then the autopsy of Jane Doe, which is a tremendous movie.
Mhm.
Brian Cox and Emil Hirsch. Brian Cox, of course, of Succession fame. Fuck off. And Emil Hirsch, that's a tremendous movie, a really, really good movie. And honestly, it wasn't that I didn't connect it with him. When I watched it, I had no idea that Andre Overdahl directed it. But now that I look back, I'm like, oh wow, really impressive job on that movie. So yeah, he's a well-versed horror director. And so him getting involved in this project kind of made a lot of sense. And, again, this is a project I mentioned during the intro. It's been in the works for 20 years. I mean, they've language, it bounced around, and at one point, I think it what's her, is it Nomi Rapace? Is that her name?
Right.
Yeah,
Yes.
she was attached to the movie at one point. Trying to remember who else was attached to this movie at different points. Like they've had so many. Like this was in the works for so many years. Viggo Mortensen was at one point in talks to star in the movie. And yeah, so this has bounced around for a really long time before it eventually landed. Neil Marshall was attached to it at one point, which Neil
Makes
Marshall, of
sense.
course, did a lot of the great. He did a lot of the great Game of Thrones episodes. Of course, he also did Dog Soldiers. He did The
The
Descent,
Descent.
a film that you and I absolutely adore.
So good.
So yeah, so this has bounced around for like 20 years until it finally landed in Andre Overdahl's inbox, so to speak.
And he's probably wringing his Swedish hands or whatever, wherever his hands are from, Scandinavia somewhere. And he was just like, oh hell yeah. And he's a capable director. So I was in. I was like, yeah, let's do this. And I don't want to get too much into the story before we drop into spoilers. But like you mentioned that it's kind of been tossed around for 20 years. I almost wonder if this movie might have been better made like 19 years ago. And here's my theory on that is that this movie, without giving anything away, relies a lot on digital animation and digital graphics, a lot. I can tell they're probably using a lot of volume work, which to them is they're probably like, oh great, like we don't have to go on the high seas and try to like stimulate or try to film on the ocean because that's so difficult. It's as difficult as you can ever get filming on the ocean. Ask Steven Spielberg, ask James Cameron, ask them all. It's really hard to film on open ocean, but they've all tried it and they've all either succeeded or failed. But there's still a touch of realism when you're out there in that water, and I something about the movie just from an aesthetic standpoint, because I think Overdahl does have a great eye, and there was a great attention to sort of the texture of the film. But as it pushes, there's no scale. It doesn't feel like I'm on a big ship. It feels like I'm on a volume. It feels like behind them is an LED screen lighting up the something in the background. And that's sort of, I don't think that would have happened 19 years ago. I think 19 years ago, they would have tried to make at least parts of it on the open ocean, or they would have gone down to the Fox studios in Baja California, which is just a couple hours from my house, and tried to shoot it on that ship or something like that to try and create that feeling. And I feel like, even though, yes, a ship, a crew that's trapped by Dracula on a ship should feel sort of claustrophobic, this movie to me lost a lot of scale really quickly, just on the technological side alone. And I know that probably for the producers and maybe for Overdahl himself, they were just like, cool, like we don't have to go on the ocean. We'll just put this big screen up and it'll look real.
So right away, let me address that, because if there's one thing I've noted on this show many, many, many times over the past 3+ years we've been doing this, is that I love claustrophobic horror films. I love contained horror films. I love horror films that again, a great example of that is The Autopsy of Jane Doe. That entire movie basically takes place in more or less one room. It takes place in the basement of a funeral home. Very contained horror. Great. I love it. I love those kind of movies. I think that's probably why I've always had a passion for zombie movies, starting with 1968's Night of the Living Dead. People trapped in a house, zombies try to get in. I love self-contained claustrophobic horror. The weird thing about The Last Voyage of the Demeter, because of the weird digital effects and just not great CGI, it never felt claustrophobic. I never got that sense of like impending doom because we're all trapped on this ship. And that makes no sense to me, considering that we're all trapped on this ship with Dracula. Like, I should have felt that sense of claustrophobia from the moment they set sail. I never felt that. And I think that's because it just didn't feel real. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, it just didn't feel genuine. Like, I was sitting down to the theater, like initially when I sat down in the theater to watch this, I had to remind myself, and I'm serious when I say this, I had to remind myself not to judge this overly positively, because I do like claustrophobic contained horror stories, because I have such an enjoyment of those films. I fully admit sometimes I might judge a film a little less harshly because it's already set in a world that I enjoy, right? And so, like, I had to remind myself, like, okay, don't do that. Like, don't just because it's a I also love, like, a great little side piece about me, Patrick. I love disaster films, like natural disaster films. I have, like, a weird, like, I love Twister, and I love
Twister's good.
The Day After Tomorrow, and, like, movies like that. Some of them are not great, but I still enjoy them because I just enjoy a good disaster film. Kind of the same thing here, where I just enjoy a good, like, self-contained claustrophobic horror film. So I admit, like, I'm grading a bit on a curve sometimes because I know the genre is something I like. I didn't really, it is that. I mean, it all takes place on a ship. Like 98% of this movie takes place on a ship that's in the middle of the ocean, but I never really felt like that. I never really felt that sense of like, I'm stuck here. Like, that's what I wanted. I went into it thinking, ooh, this is going to be cool. We're stuck on this ship with a monstrosity of Dracula. I never felt that. And I think what you're talking about, because it never looked totally real, did I feel that way?
Yeah, so, something on the execution of the scale of the movie did not feel right. Even okay, so without, this doesn't really spoil anything, but the movie starts out at a port in Bulgaria, which is where they're going to ship off from. Even that, like, I think of a show like Game of Thrones, which you and I both love, and pretty much most of the world has seen. They found a way to like blend both CG and practical sets and locations all together to create something that felt big. Was it always perfect? No, not necessarily. But it just felt like it was vast and lived in. And even that scene, that bustling scene at the Bulgarian port, didn't feel big. It felt like it was on a tiny. It felt like it was indoors. That's what it was weirdly just like. Is this indoors? This all is supposed to be outdoors, and it really feels like it's just on a soundstage.
Yeah.
There was something about that, and it's weird because like there have been times in film past. I think of the Lost Boys. At night when they're at Grandpa's house and the gang of vampires are coming after them. I always thought my entire life that was shot at the Grandpa's house where they shoot out in Santa Clara. It's not. They recreated the house to a T and the front yard with the leaves and the branches and the fences and everything on a soundstage, and it sold. I don't know what it was, but I was like, holy, like it didn't learn until we reviewed that. I was like, oh my God, that wasn't even that. And now, and I look back at it and I still can't really see the seams of it, but I do realize, oh wow, they really cleverly designed this to feel real and big. It still felt like I was outdoors in Northern California, even though I was indoors on a set.
Yeah.
We talked, we talked at length about Talk to Me in July. If July was basically Talk to Me month. At the panel, one of the Philippou brothers, I can't remember if it was Michael or Danny, I'd love to credit one of them, said something that I was like, oh, that's fucking brilliant. It makes total sense. He said, bad practical effects are better than bad CG.
Yeah.
Both are bad. We're agreeing on that. But the bad practical is going to work out better. It just always will. You're better off trying bad practical than you are trying bad CG. It's never going to age well. And weirdly, and I don't know the ins and outs of this production. I don't know if they shot a lot of it during COVID, which makes it really difficult to shoot. Let's be honest. I mean, you could see it when you and I both saw the Indiana Jones movie. It just looks weird. It looks weird, but they shot most of it during COVID. So something about it's off. The COVID era movies are, I don't want to judge them too harshly. And I don't know if this one falls into that category. Probably does based on the timeline.
It does. It does fall in that time because it was originally going to come out in January and they kept pushing it back. A lot of it was because of the pandemic. So yes, this is a pandemic era movie.
And honestly, we don't review a lot of pandemic era movies because most of them were big blockbuster movies. Well, all those big blockbuster movies, Ant-Man, Indiana Jones, even a little bit of Mission Impossible,
The
Flash, something about them just looks weird and plasticky and because I think they were working around like some pretty serious constraints. And by the way, that's fine. I'm not even faulting them for that. I'm just saying they had to work around some weird constraints, and it reflects itself on the screen. Like you can tell that they're trying to position things so that people aren't too close together. A lot of really tight shots, a lot of very, generic backgrounds, and, so that way the background falls off and people are just blurry moving back because it's probably all just a bunch of CG extras because they can't have 300 people on a set. So something might have been some factor in this. I'm merely guessing, but you're saying it's a COVID era production that got pushed back because of COVID. Okay. And that kind of reflects in the experience a little bit. I don't know when you want to get into spoilers, but I kind of want to save my plot issues for spoiler section because I think the trailer pretty much spells out the movie for you. You're trapped on a ship with Dracula. Are you going to be able to get out is the question. And a lot of you, like Damon, have probably read that passage and know what happens anyway. So, I don't want to get too much into it here, but that's the plot of the movie is in the trailer, and it's pretty much just spat back to you like as the trailer felt. Am I wrong?
No, and they put it up on the screen at the start of the movie. They tell you this is the story. They basically tell you what happens. Like in the beginning of the movie, they put a screen up that basically says this is the story of the doomed crew of the Demeter, and I was like, did they start the movie from the end and they're running it backwards? Like, what's going on here? And it was kind of weird. It was a really odd choice to do it that way. But
Damon, you bring that up. That's my very first note. At the end of that, it's saying, this is the tale of the doomed crew of the Demeter. We literally just did the Blair Witch Project, right? The Blair Witch Project. They say at the beginning, like, this is found footage that we found of this group that are trying to do this thing. but they don't at the end go, also, this is just a movie. Don't worry about it.
Yeah.
This one says, because I took it and I put it in my notes, this is based on a captain's log from the novel Dracula.
Yeah.
From the novel. They immediately, in the beginning of the movie, discharge the movie. They go, hey, this is just a tale from the book. Like, what? Like immediately before you show me anything, you go, it's just from the book Dracula.
Yeah.
I'm like, huh?
It was a really odd choice to do that. And yeah, I do want to get into a lot of the story points later. I will talk about here. I do want to say this about the movie. We know, I mean, talking about the concept, the plot of the movie is not spoiler, because the plot of the movie is, we all know the plot of the movie, as we've said now like 4 times. It's a bunch of people on a ship who are shipping crates to London, and Dracula's in one of the crates. And they're trapped on the open seas with Dracula. And this is not a speedboat where they can get to another island somewhere. They're on an old school, schooner or whatever the hell they called those boats back in those days in the 1800s or whatever. And it's a month-long trip from Romania to London. So they're stuck. They're not getting out. That's the concept. I mean, I'm not ruining anything by telling you that. That's literally the plot of the movie. I mean, you know that going into it. The problem, without getting too into plot or anything like this, the problem is that this movie takes so long to get anywhere. And I don't mean the month-long journey from Romania to London. I'm talking about just the journey from introducing us to our characters, to getting on the ship, to discovering there's something wrong, to discovering there's a creature on board, to discovering what else. I mean, it's just, it felt exceedingly, excruciatingly long to get to everything that happens in this movie. I was stunned because when it was over, I was like, did I just sit through a 3-hour movie? Because it just felt so drawn out. Everything took forever to get there. And I'll dive more into this in spoiler section, but I want to mention this here. In that era, in 1897 or whatever year they're saying this takes place, I can't remember what year they actually say this takes place, but obviously 1800s, you know what I mean? We're not scientifically advanced. Let's just say that. We're not that scientifically advanced. A lot of people in those eras went by faith and belief. And to this day, for right or for wrong, people still a lot go by faith and belief. So we're trapped on a ship. There's whatever, 7, 8 crewmen,
something like that,
captain, whatever. And then, and Dracula.
It's David Mistalchian and a couple other guys.
Yeah.
And the Onion Knight.
Yeah, the Onion Knight from Game of Thrones, Sir Davos. The idea that there's something on board that they need to be wary of, it takes them so long to get there that I was like banging my head against the back of the seat in front of me in the theater, which, by the way, I went to a late show on Thursday night. Me and my girlfriend were the only ones in the theater, so that was kind of a cool experience because that doesn't happen that often.
Oh, nice.
I was like banging my head against the back of the chair because we were more apt, like before we had scientific proof to disprove a lot of things in the world, we were more apt to believe things were not true or things were true, right? Like, we didn't until somebody proved what gravity was, no one really knew what gravity was. Like, you explained it through other means because we didn't know what it was. That's how it works. It took them so long to understand that they were being attacked by a creature on this vessel that I was like banging my head against I was literally banging my head in the theater saying, just get there already. Just get there, because it's only these 8 or 9 people on a ship. They don't have to explain this to the rest of the world. We're not going back to London and holding a symposium telling them about Dracula. It's just these 8 dudes on a ship. It shouldn't take them that long to figure out shit's gone wrong. Like, when you see Alien, a great example of claustrophobic horror, when they see the alien pop out of Kane's stomach and go running through the freaking ship, they don't sit there and theorize for the next hour. that it's actually an alien. Hold on, Captain. Hold on. Was that an alien we just saw? No, it can't be an alien. But what was that crawled out of his stomach? I don't know. It was an alien. No, it can't be an alien. That can't be explained. It's something. What is it? I don't know. Is it an alien? I don't know. That was the Last Voyage of Demeter. That was the conversation going on for an hour of this movie.
Well, so I got two things. One is that the character of Clemens, who by the way is our lead, Corey Hawkins plays the character of Clemens, who's an Englishman trying to get back to London. He's got a background in medicine and astronomy. Thank you.
Yes.
Not astrology, astronomy, the actual science. That's a character in that chapter?
No.
Clemens was made for this movie.
It's the captain's log and the crew.
Okay.
There's no description.
There's no description of anybody.
Yeah, that I can remember. There's no description like who these people are, just the captain and the men. Because it's a short chapter. It's not, from what I remember, and please forgive me if I'm getting anything wrong because I haven't read Dracula in like 20 years. But it's a small chapter. Like I said, when I saw the concept of the movie, I was like, oh, that's cool. And I had to remind myself this was in the book because it's not like a major part of the book.
Right. So there's the character of Clemens, which I think like they're attempting to sort of, and weirdly, like, especially when you describe it like that, it's like, why not just make the captain the lead of the movie? I don't know why that was the choice. I don't understand why they went that direction. That's one thing. The second thing is, I think Andre Overdahl, the writers, maybe the producers, thought that going the romantic route a la Francis Ford Coppola was the way to go. Now, if I'm not mistaken, Bram Stoker's Dracula by Francis Ford Coppola was like 3 hours, right?
Yeah, and it did differ from the book in a lot of ways.
Right, but there's sort of a grand romantic way. And by the way, Coppola is probably one of the best directors that's ever lived. He just has a knack for that stuff. Like, I don't know what to tell you. Overdahl, when I think of the movies that he's done that I've seen, have a punchy, modern sort of, like, they have their own bend to them that is Overdahl, that is his look. Whereas I think Francis Ford Coppola very much pulled from like a romantic era of storytelling, like long form drama. And I think Overdahl sort of was like, maybe I should do what Coppola did and make kind of long form drama. There's a lot of monologues in this movie, a lot, to the detriment of character development, which is odd because you go, well, the monologue's there to kind of build the character up. But what's clashing here is sort of a romantic style, monologues, and action. Because it is, I think they even try to describe it. I think the producers tried to describe it as Alien on a Victorian ship.
Yeah.
Well, Alien was a horror movie, and it didn't pretend to be anything else than it. Now, and again, Ridley Scott, you're talking about one of the masters of directing as well and storytelling. Like, again, is Overdahl at those guys' level? Not yet necessarily, but whatever. He's done a bunch of great movies. I'm not trashing it at all. But those guys work on a level that's really hard to touch. And I think Overdahl was throwing a lot of things into the pot. And I don't, and again, you're working with a lot of big, you're working with Universal's money and they're telling you how it's got to be. And you got to say yes, sir, and yes, ma'am, and do what they say sometimes. Sometimes you have to do that. Or sometimes the studio goes, we don't know. We're make a Dracula movie. Just go make it. Like, I don't know which version happened behind the scenes, but they tried too much, and you end up with no one of those elements really paying off.
Well, you mentioned I mentioned Alien earlier, kind of in a joking way about the way they don't fully accept what's happening to them, and I'm like, I don't know why, because obviously you're just trapped on a ship. You're not.
And to be fair, they don't have the evidence that they had an alien. An alien, just a fucking alien pops out of somebody. So they're like, oh, that's an alien. Like they could see it.
but the time it takes them to get from point A to point B in this
Takes a while.
excruciatingly long.
I'd say an hour in before. I mean, I didn't time it, but I'm going to guess an hour in. They were like, I think Dracula might be on this.
hold on.
Whoa. Did anyone think it could be Dracula? I'm just tossing it out there.
Could it be Dracula? It's like, yeah. So that's an issue, obviously. Yeah, and you mentioned characters. I was actually one of the notes I took during this movie. Now that I follow your lead and take notes during a movie, I noted how poor the character development was in this movie. Yet they have so many monologues and so many moments. And I was thinking again, comparing it to Alien. Really, an Alien, like they don't spend an exceedingly a long amount of time telling you who these characters are. But here's where, and going back to Pulp Fiction, all those characters in Alien had personality, and personality goes a long way. Thank you, Jules Linfield. Personality goes a long way. When you watch Alien, all those characters had a certain personality that you attached yourself to or you didn't like right away. You know what I mean? Right away. And then obviously you end up with Ripley, who is our heroine. And everyone loves Ripley, right? Like, know, and Kane, and like everyone had their own distinct personality on that ship. And even though Ripley is our main character, you don't totally know that in a lot of the movie because it's the crew. And she's not the captain. Like, she's not Tom Skerritt. She's just one of the other crew members. So while she does have a leading role, she's not, you don't necessarily just pin her right away and say, oh, well, she's the lead. You know what I mean? They do enough delving of responsibility and personality to where you kind of get to know a little bit about everybody and their personality stands out and shines. That just never happens. Right? Like, there's a spotlight on Corey B. Hawkins the second this movie starts. If you can't figure out he's the lead, you're not watching this movie. They tell you he's the lead. Yeah. Like, they're battering you over the head that he's the lead and he's the guy you need to be paying attention to. The captain is kind of part two of that. Like, he's the other kind of lead, but you definitely take him as a side character. And
hey, man, I'm gonna give you a face on that one. The captain, like, almost disappears by the second half of this movie.
By the second half, he does. First half, he's there. Second half.
By the way, he's alive pretty much the whole movie, too. It's not like Dallas, who got, eaten and taken away by the alien. Yeah, it's not like that. He's very much there. He's just sitting somewhere else, not doing anything.
The reason I mention the captain is because at least the captain has something going on at one point, is what I'm getting at. He had something happening at one point in this movie. David Dastmalchian's character, who's like his first mate, he's kind of there, and the only reason you really know him is because he's kind of at odds with Corey Hawkins' character, because he didn't really want Corey on the ship. He didn't pick him, and then Corey ended up getting on the ship anyways through the captain, and so they're kind of at odds about it a little bit. And then Toby, who is the captain's grandson. He's the only other character, and don't get me wrong, there's a lot of other characters in this film. Like, there's like 9 people on crew, and there's also
racist Russian. There's some Eastern European guy. There's a stowaway who doesn't talk for 45 minutes and then does.
The stowaway. Let me just say this ahead of time. Her name is Anna. She falls. If you look up in a dictionary horror movie trope, there'd be a picture of the character of Anna, because she falls into every horror movie trope you can imagine about a sort of damsel in distress, but then becomes a hero. And it's just like they were just like, hold on, this worked in this movie. Okay, let's do it. Let's give her that.
Oh, how about we do Ripley, but where she says nothing the whole movie. And then at the end, she has all the information for some reason.
Yeah. It's a really odd, but so like, those are your characters you get to know, even though there's like 9 characters or 9 or 10. I can't remember how many people are on this boat. And like, by the end of it, you really truly only care about one of them, which is Corey Hawkins' character. But they kind of pepper you in with a little bit of others. But like, nobody had a personality. Nobody stood out in a way to where, we've said this before when we've done reviews about movies. If I don't care about your character, good or bad, why do I care that you're living or dying? We've said that dozens of times with horror movies. If we love your character, we're going to be sad when you die. If we hate your character, we may be rooting for your death, but at least we care. The last thing you want in a movie, and a horror movie in particular, is to have a cast of characters that the audience just doesn't care about. And
You're not wrong.
That's how I felt about this movie. I did not really care about anybody in this movie. And it wasn't like I disliked. I like Corey Hawkins as an actor. Let me be clear about it. I actually really like him as an actor. But the character that they were playing, I didn't care one way or the other about any of them, really.
You're not wrong, Damon, and I think we should roll right into spoilers because I can talk about what you're talking about right now, right off of our first category, which, by the way, our categories are brought to you by the good people over at mammothheadwear.com. You see this hat I'm wearing right now, Damon. Look at all these tabs that I got going right here.
It looks like it fits you really well.
Oh, Damon, it fits me so well, and the quality. It's like it's literally the best hat I've ever had quality-wise, and it fits my gigantic noggin. My melon of a head, this massive boulder, this Demeter of a head that I have that needs extra large sails. Well, Mammoth Headwear's got you covered quite literally. Go to mammothheadwear.com, enter the code REWIND at checkout for 10% off and free shipping.
And let me ask you a question about Mammoth Headwear, Patrick. When you take your hat off at the end of the night, is your forehead indented with the back of the strap there? Because that happened to me a lot. When I try to fit one of the regular hats on, you can see the indentions in my head, okay? That's how tight those hats are. You don't get that with Mammoth Headwear. You
don't. It was a hot day, so there might be a tad bit of redness here and my office is an oven. You're welcome, audience members, because I go into this summer oven to do the podcast. But other than that, I showed you right now, there's no marks because this thing fits my head really well, made with great material. Go to mammothheadwear.com, visit them at Instagram at mammothheadwear. Don't forget that rewind code at checkout
for 10% off. All right. Let's get into spoilers and, of course, get into categories. And let's talk spoilers first because a lot of the things we were kind of dancing around we need to get into. Okay, so this film, as I said, is exceedingly long, and
you sound exhausted, Damon.
I always feel bad because
we never come in getting ready to shit on a film. That's not what we do. We don't do that here.
Not at all. This film was just excruciatingly boring for a big part of the movie because they had so many lulls in action. And it takes so long. Like I was talking about in the non-spoiler section, when they can't figure out that Dracula's on board, and they're just dancing around the idea for an hour of the movie. It takes you until the final sequence, basically the last 20 minutes of the movie, when they finally decide to form up to battle Dracula in this last scene. It takes so long to get there. And I'm just like, we just spent an hour and a half getting to the point that matters. Like, we just spent an hour and a half for them to figure out something's on board, for them to all agree something's on board, and then for them to all agree to do something about it. It takes so long to get there. Like, it's like a journey of 1,000 miles, and we walked 999 miles to finally get to the 1 mile we needed to get to.
They've made a really interesting choice. So,
why do you say interesting?
It's interesting because again, I don't know if there's a 4-hour cut where like everything is on the table. I have a feeling there might be. So they're on this ship, and we learn very early on that Clemens, played by Corey Hawkins, is an educated man who has a background in medicine and all that stuff. And then very quickly, as they're setting sail, I'd say, I don't know, a day into setting sail, one of the cargo, a big crate in the cargo falls over, and he's going in there to inspect it because he's been given a tour by Toby very conveniently, and so he knows where to check in the stow, and he finds in this big pile of dirt a stowaway, a woman who is nearly dead. This is early. I'm going to say 30 minutes into the movie because the first 15 is pretty much in the Bulgarian port. So about that 30-minute mark, we meet this. We don't really meet her. The interesting choice they do is they decide to make her comatose almost. and he's trying to like nurse her back to health. They choose that as opposed to maybe quickly getting to her being able to say, "Hey, I'm the food for Dracula." Like maybe get into that like 10 minutes later, max. I mean, 10 feels like a lot at this point in the movie. This because we're deep into the movie. She should come to maybe after the first treatment. He's trying to give her a blood transfusion. It's kind of helping her along. By the way, that's a little bit of a shout out to Near Dark, because Near Dark's the only other time I've seen it in a vampire movie where they've said a blood transfusion could cure you of your curse.
Yeah.
So he's giving her a blood transfusion, which I didn't even know in Victorian era England you wouldn't just immediately die of gangrene trying to do that, but they did it. She should have came to and been like, "You're all in grave fucking danger because I was in that box and a fucking monster is sucking my blood and he's on this ship with us." Da-na-na. And now it's like, oh shit. Now everybody can like go back to back with fucking stakes and get picked off, and we can get this thing out of here in a cool 90. Make it actiony, make it punchy, make it over it all, make it what he does. But instead, they made that choice to drag that character Anna comatose through about 70% of the movie before she can articulate everything that's going on. And then she does it kind of in a quiet corner.
She doesn't really articulate it, though.
She barely articulates it to Clemens. Barely. And then
in private, just to him.
Yeah, like in this quiet little corner. I'm like, I would go, fuck faces. We're in deep shit. Yeah. You and I'm not just talking about, the bilge where we're all taking dumps. I mean, we're literally in the biggest shit of your life because Dracula's on this shit with me on this ship with us because he's been eating me this whole time.
Yeah.
And you messed with his one food source. So we're in trouble. Why they decided not to do that, I don't know, Damon.
Yeah. Yeah, they just, again, her waking up right away and just telling them you're all in grave danger, we're all fucked, for lack of a better way. Like, that would have been, like, you set the tone right away that something's wrong. And then, I know I keep comparing...
She doesn't even have to say Dracula. She could just go, we are all in grave danger. Yeah. Like, she could just do that.
Could I also throw out, like, a little plot point that, like, I do think is a little problematic here, an issue here. So, you create Anna for the specific purpose of having her be the conduit to explain to us who Dracula is, because she's from this Romanian village where they basically sacrificed people to Dracula to keep him from just like raiding their village and killing people. They more or less sacrificed people to Dracula to keep the rest of the town safe. That's kind of the story we get from Anna when she finally wakes up an hour into the movie. So that's our conduit. She is our connection between not knowing and knowing who Dracula is. She's the one who says, we call him Dracula. Okay, great. But how they put her in the film is they make her food for Dracula in the crate. So are we made to believe, because this is the way I thought about when they found her. So are we made to believe that the whole reason the people in Demeter are doomed is because she fell out of the crate and Hawkins or Clements found her and rescued her, and now Dracula wakes up pissed off and hungry, and he just decides to feed on everybody. So if they would have never let her out, if that crate had never fallen and he had never found her, she would have just been his source of food for the month-long trip to London. All these guys would have gotten there safe and sound.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not saying that I understand putting.
I mean, that's how they got the movie. That's how the movie got itself made. Yeah.
I get that, but to me is such a bad plot hole. Like,
well, what it is it's a massive coincidence that this crate fell and cracked open and she fell out.
Like,
that's the big coincidence.
I know. I'm doing Rewrite a Living Dead, and I know I'm doing the whole thing. I try to avoid doing this because I don't want to insult professional screenwriters. I'm just a very amateur screenwriter. I am a professional writer, though. All they had to do was make her a stowaway who is trying to get away from the Romanian village, and then she discovers she's actually trapped on the ship with Dracula. The thing she was trying to escape, her village, she ends up on the same ship as him.
I mean, not to say my idea is, more streamlined, but it's just more streamlined for her to just wake up and go, "We're all fucked."
Yeah, whatever.
Like,
But the
you know,
point is,
and go ahead and give us the backstory. Yes, they used me as a sacrifice for Dracula, and they do say in the movie, they go, or they basically surmise once they figure it all out. Oh, we took away his food source, so now he's hunting us.
yeah.
They say that, but it's like, boy, did it take a long time
Well,
for that to get there.
It's kind of like, again, I'm making the comparison to Alien. Let me also make another comparison to Alien 3, which is pretty much what the plot of this movie is. It's all these people are trapped in Alien 3. It's prisoners trapped in a prison with a xenomorph. They have no real weapons, they have no real defense, and they try to go hunting for this creature as they start getting picked off one by one, and they realize that they are extremely and severely fucked. Okay? If you're gonna use the plot that she's his food source, okay, fine. Then wake her up early and have her warn them, and then they can not believe her, and then people start getting picked off and they believe her.
Great. Yeah.
But it takes them so long to get there to where she even explains to them what's going on. And again, she never really does. She explains it to Clemens, and that's it. And even then, she's still a little vague about it. Like, she doesn't totally, like, just tell him everything. She's kind of like, our village was sacrificed to a man. We called him Dracula.
Yeah. Skip all that and just be like, I was in a box with Dracula and now he's out and he's running around and shit. And know
like
that? Like, why isn't that urgent? I don't understand.
And also, like, if you want to throw it, like, I appreciate at one point they're like, we took away his food source. Now he's hunting us. That could have been another nice little twist in the movie. Is like one of the crew members gets pissed off and tries to kill Anna and goes after her because she woke up and they saved her, they're all screwed. They didn't like that was a easy dangling plot that they could have easily thrown another little action scene at, and they just, oh, she's okay now and she was his food. Well, now we're his food. Okay, cool. They just kind of move beyond it. Like, if I was on a ship trapped with a creature that is thirsting for blood, I got like 3 weeks left on this bastard, and I know that, like, the chance of me surviving are, 1,000,000 to 1. And the reason this thing has been unleashed and is hunting me is because the girl who was his food source has been let out and saved, rescued by our random doctor who just jumped on board 10 minutes ago. I'd be the guy with the pitchfork getting ready to throw him overboard. Like, I'd be like, you just screwed us all. You know,
right.
Like, there's no scene where they really, truly get angry about that. Like, that would have been the easy one. Like,
there's a very classic way you go about this, which is like sort of like The Thing, where it's like everyone kind of starts turning on each other. They do it a little bit, it's very mildly, but like the opportunity was ripe in this for mutiny on the bow, to just for them to go, we're giving her back to Dracula.
Yeah,
that's what we're doing, and you could easily have the captain and Clemens on one side and little Toby on one side going, no, we have to be good. We don't have to do that. But instead, what they chose to do was this. And we talked about character development. They chose to, like, for some reason, overdevelop Clemens.
Yeah.
Like, he has many monologues, and the first one was a long one about sort of like, I want to understand the world better. He's a man of science, and he wants to understand the world better. And that monologue is at least 5 minutes long, which in a movie is eternity. It really is. And like, does that ever really pay off? Not really. And then he has another monologue about, like, his troubles. He's a man of color, and he worked tooth and nail to get a medical degree against all odds. And then when he got to Romania, they still didn't want him and all that stuff. So he's heading back to London to try and find a different life. Okay. I'm explaining a lot of stuff, aren't I? They sacrificed all of those, what you would call horror tropes, but they're tropes for a reason. They work. To give him a very big story that never pays off.
Never.
Like, it's not like all those things that he talks about whenever they stop for 5 minutes and let him go on a monologue about his life. It's not like at the end of The Black Phone where it's like all those things counted towards the solution. They don't. And so what this movie's deeply lacking is dread, because They stop all the things that could have happened with Dredd. They stop to just go, let's examine this character. Like, and as I was saying, like, maybe Overdahl was trying sort of the romantic idea of like, it felt more like something that would be better suited to a novel than it would to this horror movie.
Well, they boned themselves because the entire reason that they made Clemens as a character and made him a doctor is because when somebody gets bit, he looks at them. When the animals get ravaged early on, he's like, this doesn't look like an infection. It looks like a bite. And then when the one guy gets bitten, he's inspecting him. Then when he finds Anna, he knows to give her transfusions of blood. Like, they literally created a character to solve problems that didn't need solutions.
Right.
And then he ends up being the biggest hurdle to figuring out what they're going up against. Because he keeps saying, this can't be what you're telling me it is. This can't be a creature of the night who feeds on blood. Like, they make the man of science the biggest obstacle to just self-realizing that they're facing a supernatural creature that can kill them. He's butting heads against that for like 80% of the movie. And they created him as a solution to problems that did not exist. They created him as a problem when there's an infection. Oh, it's an infection. It's not this. And it's bite marks. They're just over-explaining things. And they need a doctor to do that. And so they made him a doctor. One last thing I got to mention before we get to categories. I got to say this, okay? This is just with the ending in particular. As soon as we meet Clemens and Anna, my first thought is these two are surviving.
Right.
Because at the very beginning of the story, where we talked about, like you said, this is based on the captain's log in Bram Stoker's Dracula, nobody makes it. Okay, spoiler alert, no one makes it out alive. The captain's the last one alive, and they find him tied to the masthead, and he's dead. That's all they find. And in the book, a giant, huge dog goes leaping out of the ship, and they're all like, what the hell? And that's Dracula escaping the ship. That's literally it. That's all they say in the book. So as soon as we met Hawkins and Anna, I was like, one of these people, one or both of them is going to make it, aren't they? They're going to find a way to get around it. And sure enough, at the end of the movie, they go full Titanic with Clemens and Anna escaping on a piece of wood, almost like, Hooper and Brody in Jaws.
It was
escaping a burning ship that's sinking, which, by the way, still made it to shore. They made it on there, and then, of course, they did sacrifice one of them because Anna had gotten bitten, and so she ended up turning, and so she left, and she burned, and oh, it's so sad. And then later
that did feel like a bite back at Titanic's ending.
You know what I was waiting for? I swear to God, I thought this was going to happen. So at the very end of the movie, we find out that Hawkins is now in London, and he's hunting for Dracula.
Yes.
Dracula's out there in London, and I was just like, I was waiting for it, dude. Here's what I was waiting for, Pat. Tell me that you did. If this wouldn't have happened, you wouldn't have said this is just the perfect ending to this movie for everything that's gone on. Tell me this. So we know his name is Clemens, right? He's in a bar. He's shaved his beard down to a proper goatee. He's got he looks like a doctor now.
He's a dapper gentleman. Yeah, dapper London gentleman.
Tell me if the barkeep would have said, he said, because he talks to the bartender at one point, and he says something to him. Tell me you would not have been shocked if the bartender says, "What's your name, sir?" And he says, Abraham Van Helsing. He changed his name to Van Helsing. Now he's hunting Dracula. Tell me that would not have been like the perfect ending to what they tried to create for this movie. Because I was like, he's going to say his fucking name is Van Helsing and I'm going to lose my shit. Because the whole idea of this movie, Patrick, the whole premise of this movie is that no one makes it out alive. And I am a big, big fan of dour horror films like that you just know that, like, when we get to the end, like we've talked about The Thing, which is one of the greatest horror movies ever made. One of the reasons that movie is so amazing is because at the end, when it's just why am I drawing a blank?
Clemens in it.
When it's Kurt Russell and Keith David at the end of the movie. They're both a little standoffish because they're not totally sure that one of them is not the alien, But what we do know for sure is neither one of them are getting out of this. They're in the middle of the Antarctic. It's gonna the warmth is gonna go away. They're going to die there, but at least they stopped the alien. That's the entire plot. And when you get there, you're kind of like, damn, that's pretty awesome. Like that's a cool ending. I knew right away that Anna and or Clemens were going to make it, and I was going to be really pissed off about it because the entire premise of this movie is that the crew was doomed from the moment they stepped foot on this ship. Now, you can get there a million different ways. I get that. You can get there a million different ways, how you kill people, how you do it, how you have the attacks, all that kind of stuff. But the fact that they had to stick in there that Clemens survives, and now he's hunting Dracula. That's why I was like, he's going to say his name's Van Helsing. He's going to do it. He's going to tell him his name's Van Helsing now. Tell me that would have been like, oh, okay, I see what they were going for, because that would have fit. It really would have fit.
They didn't do it, but boy, it was like kind of a layup. Like they could have put that somewhere in there. Like they could have taken a monologue out and shown him like thumbing through a book, and they're like, "What book are you reading? Fuck off! You guys can't read. Like, what does it matter what book I'm reading?" And then like he holds that book sacred the whole time, and it's the book of the Von Helsings or whatever, and so he takes that mantle. It was a layup. If they were gonna make him survive, because you're right, like really nobody should have gotten out of that. There's no point. In the grand story, nobody makes it out of it, so I don't know why they made them make it out of it, because they were trying to tee up a sequel. Now, maybe that might have been a little too cheesy to go the Van Helsing route, but either way, I don't think it's going to make a difference one way or another. I don't know if we're getting a Dracula saga from this.
They went that far. I was just like, they're going to have him say, I didn't want him to call himself Van Helsing. I'm just like, I could see it coming, because it's
sure.
Like, you had to lay up. That's like at the end of The Dark Knight Rises when Joseph Gordon-Levitt's character introduces himself and they finally give his non-adopted name and they're saying, "What's your name?" All you had to do, Christopher Nolan, was say his name is Dick Grayson.
I know.
Awesome. But the fact that you had him go up and say, "My name's Robin," fuck you, okay? His name's not Robin. All you had to do is say his name was Dick Grayson. And
I'm not even a comic book guy, and I was like, why didn't he just say his name was Dick Grayson? Like, and I don't read the comics at all. I was like, why don't they just do that? Why did they do Robin? Robin's his like alias. That's his code name. It's not his real name.
That's like him going up and be like, "Yeah, my name's Robert Batman." Oh, Robert Batman. Okay, cool.
I am John Superman.
Yeah, I'm Phil Spiderman.
Yeah, Phil Spiderman.
Anyway, sorry, but yeah, that was just like when they made Clemens survive. I was like, oh my god, they're gonna make him call himself Van Helsing. Here it comes. They didn't do it, but that's how they teed it up. That's how much they teed it up when he survived. Yeah. I was like, you are killing me here.
Feels very studio, and it's, by the way, this is Universal. I think I mentioned it once before, but like, Universal owns the rights to Dracula. They own the rights to all the classic monsters anyway. So I'm sure there was somebody at the studio that was like, you cannot leave this thing hanging. There has to be a way into a Dracula movie. Like, you have to find a way into a Dracula movie.
But even if they didn't, they're just like, you got to give us a hero. You got to give us a hero that survives.
Yeah, that's a very big studio thing. It's like, no, the hero should live. Granted, they didn't do it with Rogue One. No, they could have, but folks, we could go on for hours talking about other movies. Yeah, Damon and I are fucking fanatics. We could go on.
I thought of the Robin thing; it just popped in my head. Why didn't you just go for Dick Grayson? Jesus Christ! But, no, that's what it felt like, though. They're just like, they were teeing it up for Van Helsing, and I'm just like, that's how cliche that felt in that moment. Because they're like, oh, of course, one guy survived the doom ship. No. That's the whole point of the movie. It's good. And I understand, like, they're just focusing on this chapter because in the book, Jonathan Harkness or is it Harkness or Harker? Jonathan Harker is the character you meet at the very beginning of the book, and he's the one who meets Dracula very early on. They do it in the movie as well. So people learn who Dracula is. They're almost setting it up to, like, Clemens is now our bridge to understanding Dracula. Dude, I don't know. You're telling me the entire ship is doomed, and yet two people almost made it out and one person did make it out. Then they're not doomed. One dude made it.
They could have done a lot of stuff, and they could have done a lot of things in this movie.
All right.
And
Sorry.
they chose what they chose. What can I say? I don't get to make cool movies. Andre Overdahl gets to make cool movies.
Yeah. So, all right. Let's get into categories now, as despondent as I am about this whole thing. Let's talk first about best performances we do each and every week here on the show. So, Patrick, when it comes to The Last Voyage of the Demeter, you had a lot of monologues to choose from. Who gave the best one?
My best Shakespearean performer, because everybody's talking the whole time instead of fighting Dracula. It does go to Corey Hawkins, who plays Clemens. But honestly, just because he has the most screen time, he has a lot to chew on. And like I said, I think his story was built out at the sacrifice of sort of a fun lived-in world. They opted out of the fun lived-in world and went for like a deep focus on this one character, but it still went nowhere, and that's no fault of Corey Hawkins' performance. You know, I bought what he was selling. It was just he was selling way too much.
Yeah, I mean, he was good. I like Corey Hawkins. He was great in Straight Outta Compton. He was great in The Walking Dead. He's a really good actor, and he did have a good performance. Again, you can only do so much with the material you're given, and you know, he did with what he could, and he was made to be the lead character, and they really ran with that. You know, it was like Corey Hawkins and the 9 other guys was basically the crew of the ship, is what it ended up being. Which again, that's fine. Just would not have been the choice I would have made. For me, best performance, I always liked this guy, and I was really happy to see him in it, and that's David Dastmalchian. He did a really good job of playing like the curmudgeonly first mate, the guy who really didn't want Corey Hawkins on board, because he saw Corey Hawkins as like the learned man, and he needed brutes to go on board to muscle around the ship. And, you know, Corey Hawkins was a doctor and all that kind of stuff. And so they kind of butted heads early on in the movie. And then by the end, of course, David Dastmalchian's character has kind of come around, to Clemens' way of thinking or whatever. But I just really like that character. They ended up, by the end of the movie, you kind of forgot he wasn't the captain of the ship, because he kind of took the forefront of leading the ship when the captain was just kind of like fading into the background.
Why was the captain fading into the background? I don't understand why he wasn't like in charge of anything. And by the way, that rolls right into our next category, which instead of favorite character this episode, I went with favorite deckhand, because we're on a ship, so why not go with a slew of deckhands to choose from? My favorite deckhand was Wojciech, who David Dastmalchian played, for all the reasons you just named. David Dastmalchian, great character actor. By the way, in The Dark Knight Rises, or no, he was in The Dark Knight, I think. I don't know if he was in.
No, he's in Dark Knight Rises. I'm pretty sure
he's in that one too, because I know he was the one that was in with Joker. So I think he's.
Oh yeah, you're right. Dark Knight. Yeah, you're right.
Either way, he was in a Nolan Batman. But anyway, great character actor. And you're right. He just filled that role of the curmudgeonly. And that's what I kind of liked about him this time around, is that I think normally he's kind of playful, and this he was not. He was a proper salty deckhand. Yeah. And it felt that way. And I actually liked the setup where he didn't choose Clemens at the lineup of guys, and he chose some, old one-eyed Willie who was like super fucking, salty. But the minute Willie saw the dragon emblem on the crate, he's like, fuck that, bro. Do you know what that story's all about? I wonder why he didn't say anything.
That was also another heavy-handed moment in the movie where they're like, it's the winged dragon. I'm not getting on this ship. And I'm like, could we just bang on the drum a little harder? Something really bad's going on here. Like,
yet for some reason that doesn't come up for an hour more.
Yeah.
I rest my case, but I'm just anyway. Yeah, David Dastmalchian as Wojciech, my favorite deckhand.
So my favorite deckhand going the reverse of yours was Clemens, and the reason I picked Clemens is because he's a doctor, yet he knows everything about a ship. He is the ultimate ship's mate. Yet
don't forget, one of his many monologues was, "I grew up on a ship, and my dad taught me all about the ships." And I was like,
they really made this guy the jack of all trades.
Do we need the ship monologue? I don't think we do. It's okay. I get that he knows ships. We don't need a ship monologue.
But all they had to do was make him to where he gets seasick. Like, that would have been a cooler like twist on him, is like he actually hates ships. Like that.
Yeah, something.
But he knows everything. He's a doctor. He was, I'm surprised they didn't have him cooking 4-course meals in the basement with the other galley guy. He knew everything else in the damn ship. So
also, how about this? Truncate that whole monologue, take it out, and just in the moment where he saves Toby and gets chosen, he goes, "Well, you didn't have a proper blah 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 knot," and he does the knot there and shows them, and they're like, "Oh, okay, he knows his shit around a ship. He's coming with us."
Yeah.
Like, and that you never would have had to revisit it.
Yeah.
You just
and then you could have had him like vomiting on board and like, what's wrong? And he's like, I don't like being on ships. And they're like, well, it's a curious place for you to end up. Like,
yeah,
like that could have been a fun little like play on that. Like he doesn't actually know what he's doing. He's a doctor, but he doesn't really know his way around a ship. He's actually kind of scared to be here. Whatever.
Yeah.
But the fact that he comes on board and he's like, yes, I could captain this ship all by myself. I'll save you all medically, and if you need dinner, I'll cook that too.
Yeah, he could do it all.
Why not Clemens? He could do it all. He's like the jack of all trades in this movie. Let's talk about best scare. Patrick, this film was a horror movie. Did you know that?
I heard it. No, I'm sure it was a horror movie. It starred Dracula. So
it did have Dracula. It did have Dracula. So what was the best scare in The Voyage of the Demeter?
They tried with quite a few Dracula jump scares that never seemed to materialize as scary. The one that genuinely got me though, at one point I was just kind of like lulled into just this sort of like flatline state. And it's at one point where out of nowhere, the cook, who was another great deckhand, by the way, blasts, I think it was Clemens, with the butt of his gun.
Yeah.
And it was one of those things where I was like, whoa, like I was, because I was so like mellow at that point. I wasn't expecting the cook to sort of throw his own little mutiny and tell everybody like, fuck off, I'm leaving, there's a demon on this boat, so I'm gonna knock you out with the butt of my gun. Like, something about that just got me. It was a good jump scare.
Yeah. So I will give credit where credit's due. You mentioned the Dracula jump scares didn't work. There was one jump scare from Dracula that did work, and I did enjoy it. And it was when he basically first appeared on the deck with our deckhand
Olgarin, right?
Olgarin, yes. When he's kind of looking around the ship and Dracula is kind of hiding in a corner and he's over in the shadows. And the one thing we notice throughout the time that Dracula's on the ship is the more he feeds, the more he grows and gets powerful and gains his strength back. So when we kind of first see him, he's a little frail and kind of thin, and he's kind of like, he's been surviving off of Anna's blood, but he hasn't really been feasting. So once he starts feasting on these seamen, bad choice of words. When he starts feeding on these crewmen, he starts gaining power and getting bigger and more powerful and all these kind of things. But when we first see him, he's kind of like a scrawny little kind of creature-like thing. And so when we see him out of the corner, he's under the shadows, and he just kind of springs a trap on that dude. And that's, to me, was like a pretty effective jump scare, because every other time we see Dracula, you kind of see it coming because he keeps getting bigger and bigger, and it's kind of hard to avoid him. But in that moment, he was kind of like a littler, smaller, frailer version of Dracula. And we see a blink of him in the corner, and then he springs out like a jaguar. So that was a pretty good one. So
fair enough.
All right, let's talk about best gore. Patrick, what was the best gore in Last Voyage of the Demeter?
I think the best gore came from what I guess I label it the Russian neck. There is a Russian, one of the Russian deckhands, a bit of a shithead, bit of an asshole.
Petrosky, yes.
But yeah, a bit of is that Russian, or that's Petrosky sounds
I think
Polish.
It's Polish. I think it's Polish.
I don't know. Short answer is I don't know. But he's a bit of a shithead, and he says some shitty things to Clemens. And so the next scene is basically a layup for him to die.
Yeah.
And Dracula finds him and rips the fuck out of his neck. And there, at first it's sort of like, oh, he just kind of caught him, and you see the blood, and he's trying to hold. But then there's a shot, moments later, where the camera's sort of right over the top of him, and you see the tearing and the gore and the spilling of the blood, and it's pretty impressive. I was like, that's a pretty fucking gory shot.
Yeah, they did do a good one with that, and that was definitely the goriest kill in the entire movie, and they definitely went for it in that one. For me, it was a little less so gory, but just also kind of like I know it sounds terrible when I say one of my favorite moments of the movie, because when you're talking about a doomed crew and you're talking about like people surviving, like I was just like, they're setting this up again, as I said, right from the beginning. I was like, someone's making it out of here. Like there's no way they're going to kill everybody because they're just setting it up too well. And it would have been nice not to say I was like rooting for everyone to die, but that was the whole premise of the story.
Yeah.
So it would have been that. Is when Dracula attacks Toby and we see the blood go flying with that one. I thought that was pretty good. Toby's this little kid. He's 9 years old in the movie. He's kind of like the one you're like, oh man, they're not going to kill the little kid. They actually kill him pretty, like I don't say early on, but they kill him like, a half hour before the movie ends. Like you're expecting Toby to be one of the last ones to go. You're like, oh no, not Toby. No, they kill him. They attack him pretty midway through the movie and kind of leave him there to die.
Yeah.
So yeah. Also, can I also mention with that gore, but also another like issue I have with this is that Dracula was feeding on Anna for God knows how many days at that point. They find her, they give her transfusions, and she makes it. When the other crewman gets bit, he gets turned into a vampire, and then the same thing happens to Toby, and the same thing happens to Anna again when she gets bit later in the movie. Can we have just a general idea of what actually turns you into a vampire? Because the whole idea that the transfusion saved Anna, and they kind of tried to explain it at one point, but it didn't really make sense. Like the blood loss was too great or whatever. And I was just like, yeah, but he was feeding on Anna for days, yet she was able.
I guess he was like taking sips of her, I think is what they kind of imply.
But they never say like you get bitten by Dracula, you turn. Like that's the whole idea.
I think if he gets you close to death, you turn.
It didn't.
It's messy. It's like, and I kind of had a note for that. Like, I think that just the mythology in general for this one was a little bit messy. Like
the whole
sunlight definitely messes him up, but a crucifix won't.
But the Toby death was so impactful in that moment, and it was good. I actually was like, oh, because I thought they're gonna have him get away. And he didn't. They had Dracula kill the little boy, and I was like, "Oh damn!" Like they really.
I appreciated that they went for that.
But then they let him live again. Like they brought it, like they got saved again, and then they had to, they later brought him out, and he burned up when he hit the sun.
I mean, he wasn't much saved. He was pretty much in a dire situation. The whole time.
But like it would have been just like in that moment if he was just like that was.
Yeah, full on, like decapitated or something.
Yeah, he feasted on him. He's a little boy, like you know what I mean. Like he doesn't have as much blood as the men, so he just drained him. Like, that would have been a cooler thing. But even that, they're like, hold on. We got to let the grandpa have his final few moments with his grandson before he says goodbye. Like, again, more impactful if he just off the kid. You're like, oh, man, the stakes are really high here because he just killed the little kid.
Yeah, they kind of like any chance there was for urgency, they would kind of stamp it down. They didn't want the urgency. They never wanted the tension to just go way too high so that they had to act immediately. Like they were always giving them a chance to kind of reset.
Well, that's what I said. As soon as this movie started, I was like, someone's making it out of here. That's not the feeling I wanted to have. Like they kept giving you opportunities for people to come back.
They should have gone full Scream 6 and 7 or 5 and 6 and just like fucking everybody survives.
I mean, come on. I want Reservoir Dogs by the end of this thing. I want everyone dead. Come on. What was your favorite death in the last? We're talking about all these people being saved. There actually were a few people who did die. So what was your favorite death in Voyage of the Demeter? Last Voyage of the Demeter.
Yeah, truth be told, everybody dies except one. So, they try to live up to it. The character they added to the story is the character who ends up surviving, interestingly enough. But my favorite death actually went to Olgarin. Now, Olgarin was another one where I was like, oh, this guy's the perfect opportunity because they don't say it out loud, but it seems like he's Slavic. They seem to imply that. And I was like, he should, like, they almost were like, let's give him the ability to be like, I know this legend and I know what that dragon symbol means on that crate. And for some reason, they didn't go down that road. They decided to wait. But anyway, he meets a fiery death because he gets turned by Dracula and he's like kind of feverishly dying out, and they bring him out there. He's out in the sunlight tied up because he's trying to attack people because he's turning. And as the sun hits him, he burns a nasty one. I mean, he really burns to a crisp. It's a little too CG, unfortunately. I wish it would have been maybe, I don't know, trick of the camera where you just kind of show a glimpse of him like bursting into flames. And again, back to what the Philippou brothers were saying, like just now cut to like a charring body burned, like fast forward a little bit. Don't try to show the deterioration in digital. Just cut to a body that's now on fire and kind of wriggling a little bit. That's now beyond recognition. Like just go that route instead of what they did, which is sort of a weird digital burn that didn't. I don't know. It didn't ring true.
Digital fire is tough, and it didn't
Yeah.
it didn't look great. Yeah, it didn't look
And
great.
and it wasn't always bad. Like sometimes the blistering would look cool. Like there were good moments, but I think they went too heavy on like let's just leave the camera on it and let it happen. And I was like, I don't think this digital's not that good that I would leave it on there.
Yeah. So for me, best death, I'm going back to your best gore, which was Petrovsky. I thought he had the best death because it was the most graphic and also the most sudden. And unlike everybody else, he didn't survive. He didn't make it. Like they bled him out on the ship. He died right there. And then Dracula attacked his neck and pretty much ripped his neck out. And you say best gore, I said best death. I just thought that was the coolest one because he went for it, man. He did not. There was no like I'm saving something for a snack for later. He just went full bore on the neck and took it out, and that was a good death. Real quick, before we get to the other categories, can I mention also because we're going to talk about another Dracula thing here in a second? The CG problems also really start with Dracula because they make.
True.
Let me be clear. One thing I really did like about this movie. I know it sounds like I hated everything about this movie. I really didn't. I loved the concept. I didn't like the execution. I loved the idea that they used a more monstrous Dracula, like quote unquote monstrous Dracula, not like the suave, like Gary Oldman looking dude. It's like monstrous Dracula. I enjoyed that. I was actually kind of digging that. I was like, oh, that's cool. They're going for like that version of it. Okay, cool. But it was so much CG, so much digital effects, and suddenly he's flying. Like he's got bat wings all of a sudden, and he's like this giant. He would look. You know what he looked like? Did you watch Midnight Mass? Yeah. He looked like the creature in Midnight Mass, which the creature in Midnight Mass was terrifying and actually really really cool. That's kind of what they did with this one. They kind of made it look like that, like he was like this winged giant dragon-looking bat creature,
right?
And every time that they showed more and more of him, because when he's in the shadows, he was scarier. When they started showing you his face and stuff, you're like, this is just really not good effects. Like, this is way too much digital effects with the Dracula.
Yeah, it's and often sometimes you're pinned down by like again, this was shot during COVID times. They were like, we can't just get a guy into a Dracula suit for 7 hours. The risk of like infecting him. I get that. I understand. But you said it right there. It looks better in the shadows. It looks better in the dark. Like play that game. Okay, we can't put a guy in incredible prosthetics for 8 hours. So put him in the very like general version of it and keep him in the shadows and let his eyes glint. Yeah. Something like that. Like less is more. We just talked about that with the Blair Witch. We never even see the Blair Witch. I'm scared is she in here right now? Like, you know what I mean? Like I don't know what to be scared of. And it was plenty. Like my mind fills in enough to go, okay, we don't need to do that. And I was disappointed that they relied a lot on the full CG Dracula because it doesn't sell.
Yeah, it's just not great. And as you said, as we keep saying in this podcast, bad practical effects are always better than bad digital effects because the digital effects you see through immediately. And I understand you can't have maybe you don't want to have a guy in prosthetics for 7-8 hours. And also it's not cheap. I mean, I know digital effects may sound like way more expensive, but it's also not cheap to pay for makeup artists and continuity and all these different things. But
yeah, that takes a crew. So then you're paying that crew to work, 16 hours a day to get a guy in and out of a suit and make sure it functions the entire time. It is probably cheaper just to have one or two guys in a studio somewhere digitally creating it for you.
But let's go to the next category where I will tell you what they could have done and it would have worked. Our next category is one you picked, Patrick, and that is best Nosferatu looking vampire.
You know how close I was to going best Nosferatu looking motherfucker. I was so close to writing that in there, but I was like, let me be clear.
So I assume we're talking about here is like the one who doesn't look like Gary Oldman, like the non-traditional Bela Lugosi, Monster Squad Dracula, like the one who doesn't look like the Count. You know what I mean? Like it's a more monstrous version.
Yeah, we're looking at more of that Nosferatu, the balding head, the long teeth, the long face, and the long pointy ears. It's someone that's almost looks like they're transitioning from bat to human.
Yeah. So who is your best Nosferatu? Who is your favorite Nosferatu looking motherfucker?
When you saw this in the credits, did you know right away who Max Schreck was?
Of course I did. He
Okay, good. Your fellow cinephile, Max
Count,
Schreck,
Count Orlok himself.
Count Orlok himself from Shadow of the Vampire. And if you have not seen Shadow of the Vampire, go see that. Man, I tell you, some movies like they stand all out on their own. Like, and it wasn't like Shadow of the Vampire was like a super popular movie, but it was basically about the making of the movie Nosferatu.
Right, right.
And Max Schreck, the character, is played by Willem Dafoe, who you don't have to put a lot of makeup on Willem Dafoe to get him into Nosferatu mode, but they do. They put makeup on him, and he's the quirkiest, weirdest, creepy Dracula version, like Nosferatu looking Dracula you'll find. And I really enjoyed him because he had a ton of character and is very non-traditional to the Dracula storyline. Like, he just looks like Nosferatu. He may even be Nosferatu for all we know, but as far as he is portraying himself on screen, he is an actor. And I love Shadow the Vampire.
It's a really good movie, and that's why I'm super excited for Robert Eggers' Nosferatu, because I love Robert Eggers. I think we've defined that on the show before. Although we've never reviewed him, Robert Eggers.
We haven't.
I know. The Witch, which I thought was great. I like The Lighthouse. It's weird, and I don't know it's a movie I'll really revisit, but I enjoyed it. I love The Northman, so yeah, when he does Nosferatu, I'm way into seeing that, and I think that's going to be tremendous. I can't wait to see that. So I cheated a little bit, Patrick, because we're basically what I took this category to mean is like the more monstrous vampire.
Totally. You're correct.
Yeah, and so, there's not a lot of monstrous Draculas, but there are monstrous vampires, and that's what I went for. And this is where I go back to practical effects work better. And the movie and the example I'm going to use of the monstrous vampire, there's just a very limited speech, they're there to drink blood. The vampires from 30 Days of Night.
Yeah, they're good.
They're
cool.
Those are the best, played by the lead vampire, whose name is, I wrote it down here. They didn't really.
What's his name? Houston.
Marlowe Danny Houston, yes. Angelica Houston's brother, as I found out fairly recently. I was like, oh, that's her brother? Wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Danny Houston, who played the lead vampire in 30 Days a Night. That's the monstrous vampire that I like. Teeth, jagged, claws, creepy as shit.
Black eyes, like a doll's eyes.
Evil. Just, they are there to feed. That's all they're there for. There's no conversation. There's no romanticism. It reminds me of the line of John Carpenter's Vampires, which is a movie very underrated. I like John Carpenter's Vampires a lot, but there's a line where James Woods' character is talking to the priest, and he's just like, they don't sleep in coffins lined with taffeta. They're not romantic. He's like, garlic? You want to try garlic? Put garlic around your neck. Watch as one of these buggers binge you over, walk up your Strada Chocolata while he's sucking the blood out of you. Like, he basically saying the vampires in Vampire, in John Carpenter's Vampires, are monsters. They're not, they're bloodsuckers. That's what 30 Days a Night. That's what I'm talking about. I'm not saying you need to copy Danny Houston's character from 30 Days a Night, but that is how you could do a practical effects that's not full-on monster, that is still utterly terrifying. That is one of the best vampire movies ever made, in my opinion. I like the comic as well. But
yeah, me too.
The vampires in that movie are freaking terrifying. And they're practical. You know what I mean? They're practical. They're creepy. They're made up. They're bloody. They're gross. Their claws, their teeth, everything. But it's all practical. That's the version I would have preferred for this Dracula. If you're going to make it monster and you don't want to go full CG, but you can't afford to put a guy into makeup and you have literally a suit made for him, go that route. Because I would argue, Patrick, the vampires in 30 Days a Night are some of the best vampires across all vampire films ever.
Yeah, they're scary as shit, and they are animalistic. I mean, that's an interesting choice because they're actually really close to human. They're almost just off human.
Yeah.
Whereas Nosferatu or even Max Shrek, he looks far less human than the 30 Days of Night vampires do.
But that's what I'm saying.
But
It's about the attitude of the monstrosity they
exactly,
are,
yes.
you know?
No, exactly, yes. And I love 30 Days of Night. We'll have to review it at some point.
Yeah, but that's what I'm talking about. Like, you can make a character a monster without just putting him in full on CG and turning him into a winged, creature. You know what I mean? Like those vampires in 30 Days a Night were freaking terrifying. And as you said, they didn't look that far from being human, but they were just far enough in the way they carried themselves to where they were freaking scary.
And I don't fault Overdahl and company for trying to achieve the bat-like version of Dracula. I was kind of waiting for that. I was like, when are we getting that? Like, what's taking so long to get that? COVID might have. Now, this is another thing. Like, the Thing sequel, or the Thing prequel rather, from 2011. Yeah. Like, the director fully intended and actually shot fully practical effects, and then the studio just overrode him and colored everything over in CG, and he like disavowed himself of the movie because he's like, you guys fucked me, no one's gonna like this movie now. And I wonder if Overdahl's original idea was like, no, it's gonna be this incredible practical effects that we're gonna do, and then COVID got in the way of that. I don't know that that's not the case, but I appreciate that they tried to go the monstrous route.
Well, and again, this goes back to my entire argument with this whole movie. Concept is better than execution. The concept of a monstrous Dracula is really cool. I actually really like that version.
Yeah.
It's just the execution with the CG didn't work. Just like the concept of the doomed crew of the Demeter, the payoff in the actual movie just didn't work right. But the concept is great. So I don't really blame. Like, I actually preferred that they went the monstrous route, that it wasn't some weird. I keep saying Gary Oldman because that's Bram Stoker's Dracula, the Francis Ford Coppola movie. But like, that's what I'm saying. Like the romantic Bela Lugosi.
Yeah, they didn't go romantic.
They didn't go that route. They went for the monster. I dug that. I just didn't like how they did it.
Yeah, and again, like, I'm actually not going to fault him for it at all, because I don't know what the original plan might have been. Best laid plans go out the window on a perfectly well running set. Never mind a set that's trying to go through COVID. And I respect them for trying to get the movie out there.
Yeah. So next category, Patrick, let's talk about remake, sequel, or leave it alone. And that's where we look at the movie we're reviewing, and we basically come up with the idea. Should they remake this movie? Should they give it a sequel? Or should they just leave it alone? So, Patrick, when it comes to The Last Voyage of the Demeter, remake, sequel, leave it alone.
Boy, I think I'm going to say leave it alone. And here's why. I don't think it's going to work. Because I don't think... my knee-jerk reaction was like, oh, let's remake it. But what I mean by remake is, you want to tell this high seas tale of harrowing horror, then you need to get on the high seas. Yeah. Or you need to get in a giant tank studio, and like I said, going to Mexico and get on you need to do the thing that like no production wants to do anymore. They just don't. So if you're going to remake it outside of the COVID era and try to go a little bit bigger, they're still going to pull that shit. I know they will. It's probably no fault of the director. They're just going to go, we can't afford it. We won't pay for that. Not going to happen. Do it in a studio. Do it with a volume. We'll put some rain in. Don't worry about it. It'll be fine. That's why I'm like, just leave it alone. If we're not going to do it that way, the really hardy way, it's not going to work.
So my answer is very interesting, Patrick, because, as I mentioned in the intro, Bram Stoker's Dracula has been around since 1897. It's been around for over 100 years. So I'm going to go remake. You're going to like my little caveat here. Remake it in 1977. Go back in time to make it, because Jaws came out in 75. They had to do it all practically or on ships and all that kind of stuff. Go back in time and make the same movie, but make it in 1977 when you didn't have the benefit of digital effects. You had to be on a real ship. You had to make the real monster, all those kind of things, because then you would have got the movie we're talking about. Because as I said, if you actually, like we talked about the premise of the movie, alien on a ship, on a Victorian ship, that sounds awesome.
Yeah.
If you would have made that movie, I would have been like, fuck yeah, this movie's awesome. They didn't make that movie, though. The premise of the movie is that. The actual movie is not. So
give this to Ridley Scott in 1980. Yeah, you're right. You're right. Yeah, I get what you're saying.
Yeah, 1981, 82, like around that time, you know what I mean? Make it to
Yeah.
where like they have to go practical, and they don't have the confines of like, well, we could just do it later in digital. We could do it in CGA. Cuz that's the answer to everything these days. It's like, "Oh, we'll fix it in post. We'll
Yeah.
fix it afterwards. We'll just fix it with
Yeah,
digital."
Ridley would have been like, "No, we're getting like a period correct schooner. We're
Yeah.
shooting on that. We're living on it. We're all, and I'm the captain."
Didn't
And
they do that? Didn't they do that for Master and Commander, the one that Russell Crowe? Wasn't that actually
I think
a ship? Like, didn't they build like a full ship for that? And Amistad was another one where they built like a full size ship to do that movie.
Master and Commander, large parts of it were shot on a real ship.
Yeah,
But then I think a lot of it was shot in that Fox studio down in Baja California.
yeah, but in an actual tank of water though.
But yeah, they had real water around them. You can
Yeah.
drive by that set. It's right off the highway. You can see
And,
it.
and
You can see the
Amistad
ship
was
in
the
the
same
water.
too, wasn't it? Amistad shot on a
Yeah.
ship, wasn't that like a real ship? So
Yeah, they a lot of movies have been shot on a boat. It's hell. You hate it. A lot of it has been shot on the open ocean, but it's fucking hell. Like there's no way around it. Yeah, that's not fun filmmaking.
yeah, but that's how they had to make this film. Like
And then it would have been a classic.
Yeah. That's why I
Yeah.
said make it in 1977, 1978, because you could have, because at that point Dracula was still around. Because I actually really dig the premise of this movie. I was like, oh, this is actually really cool. Just the way they executed it didn't work. Patrick, one of the final categories we get into every week, and one of my favorites we do, which is, can we survive this horror film? I hope I know the answer for both of us, because if you say something different, I'm really going to get upset here. The Last Voyage of the Demeter. Could you and I survive this horror film? Can I go first here?
Sure, Damon.
No! Everyone dies. Everyone's supposed to die. If we make it, it's not the Last Voyage. It's not this movie. You can't make it off the ship. You might go down fighting. You might give your last breath to try to stop Dracula, but guess what? You ain't seeing your wife and kids no more. So no, we aren't surviving this, because I'm not gonna make a movie where I suddenly have a guy float off on a piece of wood and pop back at the end of the credits still hunting for Dracula.
I would say I'm not going to survive this movie, but for totally different reasons.
Okay.
Because I do believe I'd be the kind of deckhand who would have a full set of knowledge on Dracula. Like, I would have been very early on, like, everybody, it's Dracula. I already know. Shouldn't even have to say anything. Don't worry about it. It's Dracula. I know what we got to do. We get picked off anyway. It would still happen. And I'd kill Dracula. I'd succeed. But by the time that has happened, the mess has been made. I'm well out into the middle of the ocean where there's nothing around. All our food sources are gone, and I'm a shitty cook. I would have died of scurvy and exposure and gangrene and crotch rot, you name it. I would have succeeded, and I would be alone on a schooner with no skills to keep myself alive, other than, oh, I can sail it, but eventually I'm going to run out of food.
Yeah. All I care about is we're all dead, because that's the whole point of the freaking story is you all die. And they didn't do that. They suddenly decide, you know what? We need to save Clemens. We need to put him there, and we're going to change his name to Van Helsing, and we're going to put him in London, and it's all going to be awesome.
That's your rewrite of Living Dead, is that he's Van Helsing. He was Van Helsing the whole time.
Tell me if they wouldn't have done that, it wouldn't have made sense. I mean, come on. Tell me I'm
Sure,
right.
why not?
You know I'm right. You know I'm right. If they
Why not? Why not?
You know it. You know Van Helsing. All right. Patrick, last category here before we get out of here. Is it scary? So at the end of the day, the Last Voyage of the Demeter, is it scary?
No, it's not scary. And look, I don't want to sound like a smart ass. I swear, guys, I don't get off on dog in a movie. I don't. I respect Overdahl. I think he's a great director, and I think he tried his ass off. I think he shot for the moon, but he missed. And that happens with great directors, by the way. It doesn't matter like what name director you are. None of that. It's irrelevant. This movie is not scary because it did a lot of weird things. It's almost like Overdahl wasn't interested in scaring anybody, which is so weird because he's good at scaring people.
Yeah.
He's got that skill. I just think he decided to make the turn to the romantic side. And I think he should have leaned into his horror roots harder. because they seem to diffuse horror at every chance they got. Sometimes they give us superior position, but like the person that we got superior position over is already looking for the thing, and we know where everything's happening. Like they just seem to dissolve dread at any chance they got.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not scary, and also it's. I mean, the problem is even in the moments when it could be scary, they fail at the scary, and a lot of that has to come down to the digital effects, particularly with Dracula, because Dracula becomes less and less scary as the film goes on. As I mentioned, the one good scare that I really did enjoy was when he was kind of hidden in the shadows and he was more of like a little frail creature. And then when they started making him bigger and bigger and stronger, it just kind of got more ridiculous with the digital effects. And to me, that just makes it less scary. And the jump scares weren't all that great. But again, as you said, I'm not coming here to just shit on a film and shit on a filmmaker. I actually really like a lot of Andre Overdall's films. I would praise The Autopsy of Jane Doe, left, right, and center. I love that movie. I think he's a good filmmaker. I think there's just a lot working against him in this movie. Good cast. You know, I think the cast is solid.
Yeah.
I mentioned I really like David Dastmalchian. I like Corey Hawkins. I enjoy Liam Cunningham, who played the captain, of course. I like a lot of the pieces of this movie. I think that's probably why it's so frustrating for me. Because, as I said, I love the premise. I hated the execution. And I think that's what really kind of ruins this movie for me, is because the bones were there. The bones were there for a good movie, and they didn't do it. I've critiqued a lot of movies on this show where I just didn't like it, and there just wasn't really a way to save it. You know what I mean? There just wasn't. There was just so much of a mess, or maybe it's bad acting, or maybe it's just a really bad story, or plot holes, or whatever it is.
Studio interference.
This one isn't that in terms of like the story. Like, this had a really strong premise. It was a really cool idea. Unfortunately, it just kind of fell short in the execution.
It did. I said it earlier. I think they tried to throw too much into this movie. It felt like a committee movie, and that could be for a lot of reasons. It could have been because of the COVID stuff. They were trying to find other ways around things. I don't know.
Well,
I don't know.
This thing was in development for 20 years. So think about how many different versions of this movie.
Yeah, how many pots were actually stewing before they actually got this thing off the ground.
How many cooks were in the kitchen by the time they actually got this thing made in like 2019?
And if we know anything about how a good ship is run, there's only one cook in the kitchen.
Yeah. Or unless you find a doctor hanging out in Romania and who actually is a captain and a doctor and a ship hand, and he's just a freaking jack of all trades. You luck out there, you might be okay.
A vampire hunter, a mail courier.
Good old Clemens Van Helsing over there.
I'm Clemens Von Helsing.
All right, folks, that's our show for this week. We got a lot of we actually do have a lot of new movies coming out in the near future. We were talking about this before the show. We've got Saw X coming up in September. We've got The Nun 2 in the Conjuring universe coming up. Of course, we got The Exorcist Believer coming up in October. Five Nights at Freddy's, which is, I know, a film that a lot of people who are a fan of the game are really excited about, and I'm interested to check that out along with everybody else. So we do have a lot of really cool new horror films coming for the rest of the year, and we will still be doing, of course, classics and other ones sprinkled out in through there. So lots of good stuff coming. Make sure to follow us along on all of our social media channels on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. Just search Rewind of the Living Dead. You'll find us on there, and you can always send us questions, comments, movies you'd like us to review. We love to hear from you guys, and we always try to respond as best we can. So please, please, please do not hesitate to send us messages on there. And you can also send us messages on our own personal email, which is rotlivingdead@gmail.com. That's livingdead@gmail.com. And of course, you can find us on all of your favorite podcast platforms: Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Amazon Music, Google Podcasts. Everywhere you find your podcast, we're there. We're like haunting you on the ship on the Demeter, except you will not make it out alive. And if you have any questions, comments, movies you'd like us to review, or how you would have rewritten The Last Voyage of the Demeter, feel free to send us that too.
Yeah, I want to hear your rewrites.
You can also hit us on our own personal social media channels. I am at Damon Martin, and you are?
At Director Patrick.
Thank you, as always, for everyone tuning in to another edition of Rewind of the Living Dead. We'll see you next week for another installment of the show. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you then.
Peace.